Good evening, everyone. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. If you guys can all find a seat, we're going to be getting started shortly. Alrighty. Hi, everyone. My name is Anissa Lopez, and welcome to the Office of Supervisor Holly J. Mitchell's Racial Justice Learning Exchange Book Club discussion on Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. Once again, my name is Anissa Lopez. I'm a co-lead for our Office 2024 RGLE team and a Hilton Fellow for Supervisor Mitchell's team, the Homelessness Portfolio. Thank you. Just want to say that I am excited for today's discussion. I really enjoyed the book. I believe it's beautifully written, and I brought up so many memories of cooking with my loved ones, specifically for me, making Mexican rice with my grandma in middle school, learning how to fold dumplings with my husband's grandma, asking my suegra which cheese to buy at the grocery store, and then FaceTiming my dad for the appropriate fish at Ranch 99. So I want to thank everyone who was able to make it out tonight and who is attending in person and those attending virtually. I want to acknowledge that we have retired LA Fire Chief Deputy Emil Mack and LA County Fire Chief Julie Kim as our panelists. They're sitting up here. And our LA County Library Director, Sky Patrick, who will be moderating. I also want to thank Masao W. Satao's Library Manager, Travis Hernandez. Saw him earlier. Oh, he's in the back. For allowing us to use and collaborate this space. I want to shout out to the students who are here on a cross-cultural exchange from the cities of Yeongju and Cheongju. This highlights the work that we're doing for cultural awareness. And later this year, students from LA will be going to Korea as well. I also want to thank Chief Maroney for being here and Director of Consumer and Business Affairs, Rafael Carabal. And then thank you to our SC2 commissioners who are here. So for today's agenda, we're going to begin with remarks from Supervisor Holly Mitchell. Then we'll go into a panel discussion about the themes of the book with room for some questions and answers from our panelists. And then we'll go into the opportunity to engage in our human library activity before ending with a call to action from our other team member, Pamela Leo. So before we begin, I'd like to review some housekeeping rules. Today's discussion may be a little bit tough for some folks. There is a big theme of grief in the book. And so we do have grief counselors on site. Please utilize them as a resource if necessary. And I encourage you to take a break, step away from your screen if you need to, if you're tuning in virtually. And I want to shout out that the grief counselors do have a room reserved in the back if you need it by the end of this discussion. So some other things, bathrooms are located in the far left corner, and then food and drinks are right behind you. We also have translation services, ASL interpreter, and then we have our translators, Alex and Son. So thank you to them. And then as a part of RGLE, can we switch slides? Sorry. As a part of RGLE, we want to take the opportunity for learning about government systems. We want to take a moment to share a distinction between county and city jurisdiction. Generally, counties are responsible for social services like DMH, DHS, sorry, the acronyms are just crazy in the county, and cities for municipal services, local streets, and infrastructure. And for our unincorporated areas, the county is both. So it's important for our team to increase the tools constituents have to engage with government, whether elected officials or agencies. And for those of you that live in the unincorporated community, Supervisor Mitchell is your local representative. And next, I'll be sharing our LA County's land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tatuyuviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands, and we are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and the local tribal governments, including, but not in particular order, the Fernando Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, the Quiche Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. So thank you once again to everyone who came out, and thank you to our Team Mitchell RGLE Book Club staff for organizing this wonderful event. And now I'm going to pass it on to Supervisor Mitchell.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Welcome to the 2nd Supervisorial District. How many of you, by a show of hands, this is your first RJLE event? Wonderful. That excites me every time I have the opportunity to have an RJLE event and ask the question, because it lets me know that we are doing outreach and we're bringing people into these really important, timely conversations about race. So thank you so much for coming. Let me start by thanking my fellow elected officials who've joined us today. Gardena Council members Wanda Love and Paulette Francis. Give them a round of applause. Stand up and wave. Hawthorne City Council member Katrina Manning. Stand up and wave. Thank you. Our partners, LA versus Hate and the Korean American Federation of Los Angeles, thank you so much for your partnership. I was watching the CBS morning show yesterday, and a wonderful writer, Michelle Norris was on, and she's written a new book. I was trying to find the title real quick, and I couldn't find it. I'll find it before we end. But it's a book about race and attitudes about race in America. And she said in the interview when she started the book, she thought people didn't want to have the conversation about race. And once she discovered in writing the book that people do want to talk about it, we just don't often have the safe spaces to do so. And I was rushing, trying to get out the door, and her interview caught my attention because I remember participating in some of the research she conducted in writing the book. And the research was, she asked people to send in postcards, or she had an online, I think I did mine online, where she asked you to express your sentiment about race in 6 words. So the anchor said, why 6 words? She said, well, if I asked for a sentence, people would write a paragraph. If you asked for a paragraph, people would say, oh, that's too much, I wouldn't do it. So 6 words, and she gave some examples, and they were so profound. People talked about their experiences with racism, their experiences with hate. People used 6 words to talk about their acknowledgement that they were engaging in racist actions or words or behaviors or beliefs. Fascinating. So that's going to be the next book I read. Second funny story I have to tell you. I had the privilege of representing Koreatown. I was going to meet some friends. Hey, thank you. It was during the Christmas holiday, and I was going to meet some girlfriends for a little R&R to go to our favorite Korean spa. And I pulled in the parking lot, as I often do, and I looked up really for the first time and realized, this is H Mart. I pulled in that parking lot 100 times. I'm like, I'm in H Mart. So I had a whole different appreciation of where I was going. I thought you would appreciate that. So welcome to the Racial Justice Learning Exchange, a initiative that my team and I started 2 years ago now. when we acknowledge that we don't have safe spaces to talk about race, and yet it's a critical conversation that we must have, particularly those of us who call the most diverse county in the country home. That does deserve a round of applause. And to honor that reality in a positive, meaningful way, we have to have the conversations. And so as you see, we work overtime with our Spanish language, our Korean language, our ASL language translators. We are attempting to be as inclusive as we possibly can to create a safe space to talk about race. We have had some amazing experiences. These events like this are organized on a monthly basis, if you can imagine that, and we've done everything from reading books together, from viewing movies together, from experiencing ethnic food together, from learning cultural dances together. And for the record, I do a mean Native Hawaiian dance, just to let you know. I'm good. We've had walking tours together. We worked with LA versus Hate and had a training experience together. So as bystanders, we are prepared and know what to do if we witness hate. We've just had rich, rich experiences over the last 2 years. And so today, I think will be very similar. I hope that we exceed your expectations and you exceed your own expectations in terms of what you learn, perhaps the emotions and feelings you'll tap into, and hopefully the new sensitivity and relationships that you'll foster. As Michelle said in the CBS interview yesterday, implicit bias is real. And when we, I think, attempt to deny it, and when, my favorite phrase, people say to me, well, Holly, I'm not racist. And when I look at you, I don't see color. Well, then you are denying who I am. We are trying to go a little deeper individually into those themes and concepts and really unpack what living the way we look in society does to us, right? The messages we get about ourselves, our own culture, the messages we get about other people in other cultures. We want to unpack all of that and live as true Angelenos in deep honor and respect of each other. I'm proud that LA County does the land acknowledgement. We are trying to unpack past harms and do better and be better. Let me look at my notes right quick since I have clearly gone off script. My poor staff back there is like, where is she in the notes we wrote? So I'm glad that you all are here. I look forward to this experience. I look forward to the dialogue about the book. I'm not going to ask how many people read the book. I know you all read the book. And if you haven't, you can go after today. You will want to, and you can check it out at your local LA County Library. Isn't that fabulous? So with that, let me introduce, I am known to say that this isn't your grandmother's LA County. And when I say that, I mean the county is doing such amazing work. And a perfect example of that is our county libraries, led by Sky Patrick, who was visionary enough, who understood the assignment, as the kids say, that during COVID, this was a place, the parking lot you could come to get a hot spot. She understood that far too many households in our district didn't have technology devices. There was, families of 3 and 4 kids who may have had one laptop or one iPad where everybody was trying to sign on for school and maybe mom and dad for work. So you could borrow laptops from your library. You could even borrow tools and sewing machines. If you're trying to start a small business or needed to do home repairs, you could borrow those kind of things from your county library. Is that amazing? Yes, give them a round of applause. So I'm proud to be a member of a county, a level of government that understands our job is to meet people where they are and provide the resources you need to thrive here in LA County. So with that, let me please introduce you to LA County's Director of our Public Library System, Sky Patrick. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Supervisor Mitchell. Good evening. It's hard to follow Supervisor Mitchell, wouldn't you say? So much sincerity. My name is Sky Patrick, as she's mentioned, and I am really thrilled to be here tonight to host this event at one of our gorgeous and newly renovated libraries, Massasoit. So thank you for being here. We certainly hope that you enjoy this conversation tonight, learn something, share something, and then ultimately we become a better society in a better LA County because of it. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up our panelists. We have, I'm so sorry, let me get my notes here. See, usually they give me a table because they know I come with a lot of notes. Okay, here we are. Sorry about that. We have Julia Kim from the LA County Fire Department. Can you please come up? There we are. And then we have a retired fire person. You notice I didn't say fireman. Mr. Emil Mack from the City Fire Department, if you would please come up. So I have their bios here, but these folks are so outstanding that I really wanted an opportunity for them to talk about themselves. I think it's a better picture painted when you hear from their own mouth who they are, what they've done, and what they've achieved, and why they're in this conversation. So if we can start with you, Julia, please.
Wow. Can you hear me?
I'm going to move over so there's no feedback.
This is probably my nightmare, talking about myself, so I'm going to be fully transparent. Anytime I'm asked to write a bio, it truly is like I completely freeze. I really don't like talking about myself, so I'm going to do my best.
I'll back you up if necessary.
Thank you. Yes. Remind me where I was born and where I moved around. So I was born in Chicago. I've moved around quite a bit. I've gone down south. Ultimately, I spent the majority of my childhood in Michigan before I moved out here to Los Angeles. And I think I've been in Los Angeles long enough now where I can't really call myself a Midwesterner. I've been in LA now for, 20 years. I was lucky enough to get a job with the LA County Fire Department about 9 years ago. Or I should say they were lucky enough to find me.
That's right.
So I've had different positions in the LA County Fire Department. When I joined the fire department, I was not a firefighter. I was an administrator, and I've had different positions, but ultimately I'm now currently the deputy chief over business operations. So I work under another civilian administrator, but essentially we help support the fire department on the administrative side, business operations side.
And she holds a bachelor's of arts in political science from California State University, Northridge, and a Juris Doctorate degree from Loyola Law School, Los Angeles, and is currently working on her Master's of Art in Negotiation, Conflict Resolution, Peace Building from California State University, Dominguez Hills. Ma'am, are you not busy enough?
I always forget to mention that I'm a licensed attorney because I don't know how the audience will receive me. So thank you for that.
Okay, so we're going to move on. We're going to have Mr. Emil Mack introduce himself, and I'll follow you up if you forget details about yourself as well.
Good evening, and it's very nice being here, seeing all of you here. Julia and I made an agreement that if either one of us faints, the other would faint too, just so we didn't feel by ourselves. But I was born in Seoul, South Korea, 1957, long time ago. And I was an orphan because it was right after the war. And my mother couldn't take care of me, and she took me to a police station, and they took me to an orphanage. And 3 years later, I was adopted. And I was adopted by an African-American family here in South Central Los Angeles. So I grew up on 8th and Jeff, as we call it, Jeff. And I went to 6th Ave, went on to Mount Vernon and Dorsey. Part of what you may hear in my conversation tonight is my identity and things like that. So we'll get to that when we get there. But I grew up with gangs. One of my good friends was a guy named T. Rogers. He was the guy that founded the Bloods gang. So he and other black friends were partly why I survived my childhood. So I went on to school, UCLA, and then from UCLA I joined the Los Angeles Fire Department and had many good experiences there. And we also had some difficult times too, and one of those, which kind of is appropriate for this setting, is we took on the century-old culture of the good old boys club in the fire department, discrimination and equity and stuff like that. And it was a hard fight. So we survived it, and we actually were able to change the culture within the fire service. So after that, I left the fire department. I went on to do community work, and so that's partly why I'm here tonight. And thank you.
That was actually a great introduction. Only one piece that he left out that I think is really relevant for this evening is that his story has actually come full circle. He and his partner, Jenny, had adopted their daughter, Mia or Maya? Mia from Korea. Is she here?
No, she's at volleyball. Yeah.
Okay, let's get into this conversation a little bit. And then I think I don't think we mentioned, but we also have later on, and I'll talk about this a little bit, Dr. Wong, who will be hosting the Human Library in the back room, in the community room. And I'll talk a little bit about that because I hope you're just as intrigued as I was the first time I heard of the Human Library a couple of years ago. So we'll introduce that. We'll socialize that for you a little bit later. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about culture. Supervisor Mitchell kind of teed this conversation up. For the two of you, you have such interesting backgrounds. When I read your biographies, I was like, let them hear. I want to hear about who they are, how they became who they are. We have two. This is such a unique panel, by the way. We have two people from the fire department. How random is that? I don't think I've known more than 4 fire people in my entire career, including Chief Maroney here. So can you talk a little bit about culture and what cultural heritage means to you, and how does it feel to be connected or maybe even disconnected? Let's start with Emil.
Okay. So, as I said earlier, I was adopted by an African American family. And at the young age of 3, I had no recollection of Korea or anything like that. And so I grew up in an African-American family surrounded by African-Americans. And so one of the things that people will often ask me, they'll say, how do you see yourself? And I kind of think my answer is somewhat natural. It's, I see myself by the people that cared for me, that loved me, that raised me. And they were black. And so for half of my life, and I shouldn't say half of my life, for my entire life, but especially for the first half of my life, I saw myself as black. And a little interesting thing that my friends used to tell me is that my Asian friends would say, you look like us, but you don't act like us. And then my black friends would say, you sure don't look like us, but you act like us. So it was an interesting blend there. But so everything in my life, especially when it goes back to this book and the author talks about what she identifies with and remembers from her childhood, to me is black. I remember the Creole cooking that my grandmother, who the only Korean word I brought with me from Korea was hominy. And I called my American black grandmother hominy. And it stuck. And that's the only Korean word I knew for, again, most of my life. But just like the author races her mind back to the kitchen and back to her childhood memories of food, for me, my childhood memories of food are black. Our gumbo, our jambalaya, our stuff from the South, from New Orleans, which is where they were from. So that's a little introspect into my identity. And when I brought that term up halfway through my life, I was reintroduced to the Korean community. And so now that has kind of come full circle where both halves of me are complete. My African-American youth, along with getting back in touch with my Korean roots.
Thank you for that. I think he teed you up nicely, Julia.
I think what's kind of beautiful about listening to your story is that it sort of, in a different way, mimics mine, because I'm Korean, I'm full Korean, and I have Korean parents. They're my biological Korean parents. But I sort of had the same or similar experience where, I grew up in the Midwest, surrounded by a population that really didn't look like me. I also spent 2 years in the South, really not around population that looked like me. So I actually grew up younger, and I thought I was white. And it wasn't until other kids pointed out that I wasn't like them that I started to recognize that I wasn't white. But very similarly, like I had the feeling, I had the experience of my friends would say, "You don't look like us, but you sound like us." When we talk on the phone, I sound just like one of them. But when I would go to Korea, visiting family members, I would get, "You look like us, but you don't sound like us." And almost that I wasn't like one of them, because even though I'm Korean and my parents are Korean, there was a little bit of shame in the fact that I couldn't speak Korean fluently. I knew just enough to order food and alcohol, which might give you a little insight into my youth. But it's just interesting that it's similar. We were raised differently, but there were very similar sentiments.
You make me think about part of the book where Michelle Zauner talks about going to Korea with her mother and only being associated with the Korean community when she was next to her mother. So did you find that same kind of experience, that you were then Korean by association with one of your family units?
Well, I think what I learned was if I just walked around and didn't talk, and when people talked to me and I just nodded my head, I sort of assimilated that way. But my experience in Korea was very different. The 2 of the 3 times that I traveled to Korea was with my father. And that was a whole other different experience, because this probably dips into some other areas that we would be talking about. But I wasn't really raised traditionally. I was raised traditionally in certain ways, but in other ways I was not. So, the first time I went to Korea, I'm 13 years old. I'm eating at the table with other men, surrounded by men. All the women in the family were nowhere to be seen because they're all in the kitchen. I'm unaware of the disconnect because I'm 13 years old and I'm just thinking about eating. That it wasn't, and I was there for a month, but it wasn't, I think a couple weeks into it, and I recognized, where's my cousin? Where's my aunt?
So the women or young girls can't sit with men for dinner? Is that what I'm understanding?
I think it's probably different now, but for me growing up, in my family, it was very much traditional where the women didn't eat with the men, and they didn't eat until the men ate. So really, it was the men ate first, and the women remained in the kitchen, where I didn't recognize that disconnect because I was eating with the men. But that was where, again, culturally, it was a little bit different for me because my father allowed that, and I didn't know that that was different and that I was being treated differently. It might be why I'm a little spunky today, because I didn't recognize that I was not supposed to be this way. But yeah, so I would say that my experience in Korea was very different just because of who I was with. My father gave me access to areas of Korea that I probably wouldn't have gotten access to just because I was a young woman.
Yeah. You make me think about just this whole panel, myself included, about this interesting, sort of confluence of communities and culture. And for me, it's not the same as the two of you, but there's certainly a level of code switching that I have had to learn in terms of assimilation from Black community to other communities, and particularly someone in my role. So I definitely associate myself with your comments, although it's a little bit different. I wanted to talk a little bit about how this book discusses the complications of being mixed race and multicultural and the tension that can sometimes come up. Both of you sort of alluded to it, but can we talk a little bit about how that your identity, or maybe lack of a Korean identity, is it still on? Okay. How that sort of translated during your time growing up. So you're in the Midwest, you're here in South Central Los Angeles, formerly known as South Central Los Angeles. I think it's called South Central at this point. Can we talk a little bit about that sort of that place, that conflict of belonging but being othered simultaneously?
So for me, and I think maybe there's kind of two ways of thinking. One is the kind of path that I had which really wasn't to think about anything. I'm kind of stupid that way. I don't think much. But it really wasn't, I needed to know what I am. I knew who I was. I'm a Korean adoptee. I knew my parents were Black. I knew most of our friends were Black. So I didn't spend a great deal of time pondering, what am I? I think some people do. And so there's two paths that people travel on that issue. And because I didn't really spend a great deal of time focused on what am I, but living the life that I had, I think that propelled me through most of my life. And it also made me very open and accepting, because my parents, they were Black, but we had friends of every race. And they always, even though they felt discrimination and things like that, and I heard the stories when I was small, they didn't burden me with it, but they always encouraged me to move forward. Don't let things stop me. And so my identity never was an issue unless others made it an issue and brought it to my attention. And often my response is, as I'm responding now, I am who I am. In fact, one of my school friends said of me, he says, Emil wasn't Black, nor was Emil Asian. Emil was Emil. And so that's the path I took. And it has made my ability to work with diverse groups, build relationships, build bridges, all that much more, taking the opportunities and so not trying to put myself in a box.
So if I hear you correctly, you managed it by just, I am what I am, right?
Correct.
Okay, I hear that.
Popeye
Michelle,
said that.
Sorry?
Popeye said that.
I was trying to remember what character said it, and I couldn't get to it fast enough. It is. Thank you. So, Julia, just kind of turning that question back on you, but I'm really curious about you. You said that you thought you were white. Do you think that there was, for your family or maybe even in your environment, I also grew up in the Midwest. I also grew up in Michigan, so I see you. Lansing.
I went to Michigan State for a short spell.
Let's talk afterwards. Go Spartans. Okay. Do you feel like there was sort of an unspoken expectation that you assimilate and become part of that community by your parents or by, the Midwest community? Or was there any sort of reason that you felt white other than just not seeing other Koreans?
That's an excellent question. I think it was...
And I'm off script, by the way.
Well, you're doing really well because that's an excellent question. I think it was a combination because, I look back, I think children are resilient because I remember when I was growing up in Greensboro, North Carolina, getting on a school bus, I was super excited because I'd never been on a school bus. And back when I lived in Chicago, I felt like only the rich kids, rode the school buses, so I felt super fancy. But I remember getting on a school bus, first day of school, and then trying to sit right behind the bus driver. And having the bus driver tell me, you can't sit there. And feeling really, really weird about why I couldn't sit there. And realizing that it was because of the way I looked. But, and that was just one example of many that I can give because, it was the South. But I do think that those were reminders to me that I was, even though I thought, because I looked at everyone else's faces, I thought we all had the same face. Those were tiny little reminders growing up that we don't have the same face, that we are different. And then the challenge that I had even at home, trying to reconcile the fact that I have parents who wanted me to be 100% American. We all got American names. Julia, Susie, Andy. Shout out to my siblings. I don't know why I'm saying that. I don't know. They're probably not even watching. That's just how we are, super supportive of one another. But even my parents took on American names. Seung-ho and Young-suk became Stephen and Diane. But it was, for me, a constant pull-push. It was assimilate, speak English perfectly, don't speak English with an accent. Oh, but then, when you come home, serve your brother. And that was I don't understand this. But again, in the book, the author really delved deep into her relationship with her mother. I had more of a really close relationship with my father, which is, again, I feel not typical in Korean culture, just because it's usually the sons that are sort of idolized. And in my family, that was very much so. It was just that idolatry was between my mother and brother, and now I'm really going to hope that they're not watching. Because I used to joke that the umbilical cord can stretch far, because she's in Michigan and he's in San Francisco. But I think for me, I think I became who I am because of that push-pull, because of all those tiny little instances and interactions that I had with people that, would sometimes make me feel bad. And then just having to learn how to navigate through those emotions on my own, because it was hard to communicate that feeling to your parents.
Especially if your parents are trying to create a better life and environment for you, that conflict between wanting to please them and trying to find identity. Yeah. I could be here all night. I have 1,000 questions for these two, but I have just been given my 5-minute time already. I just got started. Y'all should know I talk a lot. Let me segue, because this was such an important theme in the book, and about food, one of our favorite conversations. And so I'm sure all of you had an opportunity to partake in the delicious snacks provided by Holly J. Mitchell in her office and back. If not, please make sure you stop by on your way to the Human Library. But let's talk a little bit about food, because I'm really interested in you and the gumbo. What were name a dish that made you feel really loved and comfort? So, like, for me, it's my grandmother's sweet potato pie, like forever and ever and ever. One dish, and why?
One dish would be okra. And my
You
grandmother
really are Southern, aren't you?
and my mother both made it with the spices that we're all familiar with. And some of my friends would eat the slimy okra. There's the clean okra and there's the slimy. We ate the slimy.
We remember, some of us.
And that's the one that, like in the book, just propels me back to when I was very young. And in our family, that type of cooking, we come from a line of chefs. My grandfather was a chef. My dad was a chef. My son's a chef.
Wow.
My daughter's going to be. But cooking is just a lineage thing in our family. And the dishes that, like we just said, just one dish just takes me right back.
Like water for chocolate. I'm sure yes. Like queen sugar. Many cultures have this affinity for what would be considered soul food can bring to them. I love that story. How about for you, Julia?
There's two. There's the standard, and I know this is like, I feel kind of embarrassed saying this, but it's kimchi jjigae. And I say that because everyone is just like, come on, really? Kimchi jjigae can't be a little more exciting than that? But there's something comforting to me about kimchi jjigae, and I'll tell you, I don't have a super close relationship with my mother, and we are definitely not lovey with each other. We don't use words of love or affirmation. She wouldn't even know what that meant. But what she does do is that when she visits, she always makes me kimchi jjigae. That's because cooking and food is truly a love language for her. So she visits me, she makes me kimchi jjigae. She visits my sister, she makes my sister's favorite dish. She visits my brother, and, he just gets the full spread.
Including the house clean and all of that.
Yeah.
We're not bitter, though.
No, not at all. We could have a separate panel discussion on that. But then the second dish really is seolleongtang. And that's because that was my father's favorite dish. My father's passed.
What is that?
Seolleongtang is, I think it's like a bone broth soup, and it's got like clear noodles and sliced beef, brisket, I think. Growing up, it was not my favorite, but my father loved it. I mean, he would seek out seolleongtang restaurants. But that I think every year on the day that he passed, we used to kind of go to a restaurant and we would choose to eat something that my father really loved to eat. And, I didn't like seolleongtang growing up, but now it's weird. Like, I think I've grown to like it. But those are my two sort of dishes that kind of resonate with me or bring forward emotion.
I love that. Thank you so much. Isela, do we have time for QA? Okay, so enough of us talking. We want to turn the mic over to anyone in the audience to ask either of our panelists a question, or if you want to make a comment about the book. Am I the microphone girl? Okay, got it.
Hi, I'd like to ask Julia, why do you feel that your parents they chose American names?
I think that they wanted us to really fit in. I actually have a Korean name as well. All of us got an American name and a Korean name, but our Korean name was our middle name. So my full name is Julia Yuri Kim. My sister is Susie Nadi Kim, and my brother is Andrew Adam Kim. growing up, I was happy for my American name just because I've seen, the snickering and sometimes the bullying that can come from having, not a standard typical name. But now, as I've gotten older, I very much appreciate the beauty of our Korean names. And sometimes I wish, I'm like, you better, for a spell, I was like, I'm not going to answer to Julia. You have to call me Yudi. And then, of course, I'm like, who's Yudi? Because I grew up, answering to Julia. But I think that's truly the reason why I think my parents were trying to spare us the bullying.
I actually have a couple of friends who are Korean, and they go by initials instead of, that's a new one. Okay.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier that you grew up around gangs, part of the Bloods. How did you end up as a deputy fire chief from going to gangs to that?
Well, all my gang friends took out all the fire chiefs. So they did me a good. No, but if any of you know the story of T. Rogers, he actually created the Bloods as a counter to the Crips. He absolutely did not agree with the Crips' way of doing things. And his whole philosophy was the opposite. And probably why he befriended me. But as we know, the Bloods eventually morphed into something quite different than his original vision. But aside from growing up in the gangs, it was my family. My dad and my mom were very hard-working people. They instilled that in me. We sat at the kitchen table every week when I had a spelling test the next day, and my mom would drill me, and I meant smack me upside my head. No, she didn't do that. Yes, she did. And they were, very, they had a great work ethic, and they instilled that in me. And then to always try, and as I said earlier, no matter what you're facing, you are going to push forward, push ahead, and they instilled the work ethic and study hard and do the best you can. And so that got me past those younger days into the life that I eventually, ended up with. So I have to thank my family.
We have one question over here. I'm going to turn the mic over. I still want to figure out how you became a fire chief rather than a chef, but that's for later.
Hi, where in Chicago are you from?
Actually, Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was born in Chicago, too.
Oh, were you?
And
yeah.
I am also first-generation American. My mother was an immigrant. And did you feel, I know you said you weren't close to your mom, but did you have a feeling of that your mother had an air of perfection the way the mom did in this book, and that it was put upon you and your sister to be that perfect American?
Now I really hope my mom's not going to watch, because she's not going to want me to.
I can say that my mom did. Like,
Okay, yeah.
Don't leave the house without lipstick.
I was going to say,
grew up, it was a whole thing.
Diane's my mother, and I like to call her Diane sometimes because it really just. But she has doled out some pretty epic beatings. The stereotype, when it came to my mom, was definitely not a stereotype. If I got an A, it was a why isn't it an A+. I'd be afraid to go home with a B. I actually liked A- because putting that plus sign was like way easier, was it not?
Ingenue?
Right? I know it sounds like I'm a complete delinquent, but I want you all to know that Diane and my father, Stephen, they did their job. They did have extremely high expectations. My mother was very much the disciplinarian. She is 4'9", and she scares the living daylights out of me, still to this day. She has no qualms about putting me in my place. She doesn't care how old I am, who I am, none of that. I think my father was not a disciplinarian, but he gave me the freedom to be more than just a Korean woman and a Korean girl who was, because, beauty is such a big deal. Like you said, your mom's like, make sure you put on lipstick. But for me, growing up, the emphasis was on studying, because I wasn't considered the ideal Korean beauty. It was my sister. So the emphasis for me was really focused on studying, getting good grades. But my father, I used to joke, I was his first son, because I had a bowl haircut. I was raised as his right-hand ride or die, So I think it was a combination of both. But I would say that perfection is. I joke. My dad's favorite saying is, "If you're on time, you are 15 minutes late." That's any indication.
No, that's crystal clear. I think there's so much more. This is such a rich conversation. I know that we have to move on.
And Sky, if you want to do a 1-minute wrap up for each of you, you can.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I have, listening to both of you, we have to have a part 2 at the LA County Library. We have a Trailblazers program that we do online, because I'm really interested in unpacking this idea of the model minority. I think a lot of us have experienced similar things from a different cultural perspective. So much more I want to say to you. So maybe if you can each give us sort of your parting words, maybe your swan song for the night, or words of encouragement. Maybe you want to comment on the book, because unlike the supervisor, I actually want to know how many of you read it. Okay, thank you. So maybe you want to comment on the book or associate one of your experiences with Michelle Zauner, or anything that really resonated with you from the literature.
I think the thing that I walked away with is the author, after her mom had passed, and remembering all the things the difficulties that they had as a mother-daughter. I think we all have that as children with our parents. And unfortunately, when they pass, it's when we realize that. And we truly then, we remember some of the bad stuff, but the good stuff is what really overwhelms you. And then you get that tinge of regret. And that, why couldn't I have been a better son, a better daughter? And it's a message to everyone. It's, you may have difficulty with your parents. They may have difficulty with you. But you are family. One day, one of you is not going to be here. And don't let the regret happen then, that you can try to do something, just a little nice word a day, or just thank you, mom or dad, or whatever it may be. But just take that little thing that you can do something while they're here that you can also remember later in your life when they're not.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Julia?
I mean, I think for me, because I was not as close to my mother growing up. I mean, obviously we had a real challenging relationship because I was not a model minority child. I mean, it's weird to say that because, I'm an attorney and she kind of got what she want. You got what you want, Diane. But I will tell you that the road to get here was ugly. I was a black sheep. I did some pretty terrible things in Michigan. I'd like to go under an alias, if at all possible sometimes. But one of the things really that this book did for me is actually I began to appreciate my mom more, because since my father passed away, in my mind, he's become like this paragon of virtue. And let's be real, he really wasn't. He just is in my mind and in my heart. But when I read this book, it really made me think about and examine my relationship with my mother. That even though I'm not as close with her as like my brother, and I never will be, because it's Andy Kim. Not salty at all.
No one thought so.
No. Yeah, no. I've, several thousands of dollars worth of therapy has said I've accepted that I am the third favorite child in the Kim family. But it's that notion of the connection to your culture and your heritage through food is huge for me. I am not a cook. Again, not a stereotypical, Korean. I don't like cooking. I'm also terrible at cooking. You would ask me to never cook. But when I have to cook, and if I want something Korean, you will 100% find me in H Mart, and I will 100% be on the phone with Diane as she helps navigate me around the shopping mart. So that's actually what it made me. It made me think back on that and really reevaluate my relationship with my mother, and that even though I don't have the same relationship with her as I did with my father, she is still Diane Kim, a 4'9", super scary lady, who did a hell of a job in making me the person that I am. And I can't even talk about the notion that she might not be here anymore, because I'm not an emotional person, and I am not about to get emotional here. But I think that's really what it made me do, is really think about myself, my relationship with my mother, and having that appreciation for her, truly.
That is a perfect wrap. So one of the things that we didn't have an opportunity to get into is the profound grief in the book of losing someone so close to you. And then all of the things, all of the cycle with 7 stages of grief that the author goes through, and ultimately she comes out on the other side of her grief and feels more empowered. Because of that, Dr. Wong is here someplace in the back, and she has provided some assistance here for anyone who might need to have a grieving moment. Well, grief counselor, we do have some available. We have them in the back. They'll raise their hands. So please feel free to utilize that service. And if this book or if any of these stories brought up something for you, Supervisor Mitchell and Dr. Wong have provided some services for you. In addition to that, we're going to segue to our next part of the event, which is the human library. So a human library is a narrative tool used to allow individuals to tell their